Can I have your attention, please? Thank you all for your attendance and taking the time to come to the meeting. To become more educated about the proposed renewable energy projects and to help shape our district and community's future. I'm Jim Young. My family have been farming 40 k's south of Walcha since the 1960s. With 3 of our children and their families on the farms, we intend farming here for a lot longer. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome our elected dignitaries, the Mayor of Walcha, Eric Noakes, and the councillors, Federal Member for New England, Barnaby Joyce, State Member for Northern Tablelands, and New South Wales Minister for Agriculture, Adam Marshall. Apologies from Kevin Anderson, who's unavailable, the Mayor of Armidale, Sam Copeland, and his Deputy, Todd Redwood, and the Mayor of Uralla, Robert Bell. We've extended an invitation to the developers of the Winterbourne Wind Project, Vestas, to Doug Landfair, Project Developer, to Walcha Energy's Mark Waring and Dan Muller, to the Executive of Walcha Wind. All have unfortunately declined to participate with the meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to alert the community to the details and shape of the Winterbourne and other renewable power generating projects planned for our district, to ensure you all understand the importance of having an input to shaping our community and district, to show the community how the environmental impact study responses process works, to collect and measure community response to the proposed projects, to give some direction and motivation to people to act, the intention to learn from other communities that have experience living with wind turbines and learn about the process of community response to the developers' environmental impact statements, and to ensure we do all we can so the community is not negatively impacted by the projects. We have an opportunity to have an input into the planning process. This will occur when the EIS is presented to the community next month. Then we've got 28 days to respond to a 4,000-page document. It's our aim today to prepare you as well as possible for this process. When we see the EIS document, we'll try to highlight the relevant points and communicate them to you and encourage you to submit your opinions to the relevant decision makers. This will be covered in a detailed handout with future communications. What can we expect? If we do nothing, we give the developers a free rein to exploit their opportunities in Walcha. If we make an effort to express our opinions, we will help shape our district and community and benefit everyone. Thoughts from my perspective: renewable energy projects are going to increasingly be a fact of life. Both our federal parties have made commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reducing our reliance on fossil fuels and replacing them with renewable energy sources. If they're going to be in our area, we need to be educated about the proposals. We can influence the number and size of projects in our district and what remuneration in return. The Walcha district is an attractive, scenically beautiful and highly productive area. Let's be clear about this. If all the proposed projects go ahead as outlined, our landscape and community will be changed forever, unrecognisable from what we see today. The pasture wonderland will be reduced to an industrial landscape. It's not only the wind turbines and towers, but also the multitudes of transmission lines, their supporting structures, and the comprehensive road development network for construction and maintenance. It's unlikely they will use any local labour or contractors in the development process. As a community, we need to determine what number, if any, of we are comfortable with and have our say. The developers of foreign companies and the towers and turbines built in China, they and the project coordinators aren't doing this for Walcha's well-being. They're out to make money, and plenty of it. Some rough figures: $9 million to build a wind tower and turbine, gross revenue of $6 million a year, life expectancy 25 years, that's $150 million. There's no compulsory decommissioning fund in place, so the decommissioning will be the responsibility of the owner of the facility or the landholder. That should test out the D6. With the amounts of money to be made from these things, the Walcha community, the hosts and neighbours of facilities need to be remunerated handsomely. My thoughts, 5% of gross revenue split between hosts, neighbours and community. There will be more discussion on this topic and many more as the meeting progresses. I'll now hand over to Cameron Greig, the moderator for tonight's meeting. Cam.
Good afternoon. Look, thank you very much, everybody, for coming in. It's a welcome show of support for the community to just pull together. My name's Cameron Greig. I've been asked to moderate the panel. I'm going to read through the notes because there are quite a few things that I just don't want to miss. But I will be taking this role very seriously because we want to make sure that we get the most out of the session and that we do it in a professional and courteous way. So that being said, we are not professionals, but we will do our best. So your support in maintaining a positive atmosphere will be really appreciated. Our very quickly put together group is in its very early days, but we really have just put this information together, and the information that we've presented you with has been put together by us. So we own that material and take ownership of it. So if there are any questions, please direct it back to us. We want to be an approachable, welcoming community group that engages the community, informs the community and prepares the community, as Jim said, for the process of an EIS response to numerous renewable energy projects. The first of these is Winterbourne Wind Project, with the EIS being due to be submitted in a month or so, or presented, I should say. To avoid any confusion, we are supporters of renewable energy and its responsible development. We're not anti-renewable, as some may have made the assumption. If we have a position, it's simply that our community needs to be aware of the scope and the shape of the planned projects for the area and have an active role in helping shape that for Walcha. We're here because we feel that there is a gap in information, and it is crucial that we become informed of what is happening over the next 10 or 15 years. Many of the community are simply not aware of the fact that there are 6 projects planned out of the Walcha Energy Office alone, and approximately 6 other developers in the Walcha area, each with their own projects being planned. There is a lot happening. We're asking that our community get across the facts and be a part of the process of informing the planning departments what we feel might be right for our community. We've felt that we should have a few rules for the day during the speaking and the Q&A. It's crucial that we don't make this a personal affront to anyone in or out of the room, whether someone is a landholder, a developer, a questioner, or simply sitting on the fence. No one will be personally targeted, and a breach of this really won't be tolerated by the group, and we'll make sure that's adhered to today. We're recording the day. It's another thing that should be noted. So the video will be focused on the panel, not the crowd, but we need to let you know that the day is being recorded. We want each of the speakers to be heard and respected. We've asked for them to speak to our community, and some have come from a long way, and I know Pete's in the middle of landmarking at the moment, and driven 5 hours to get here, so thank you to all of the speakers for taking time to do this. We'll have questions after the panel has finished presenting, and if someone's uncomfortable about asking a question, we will have people helping out, so write down a question, hand it to someone, and we'll make sure it gets answered. In the interest of gauging community sentiment, we've also got a survey that we've handed out to everybody, and we'll probably try and collect that halfway through the Q&A session. We don't want a flood of people leaving the room without us being able to collect them. Just regarding the presenters, I just want to add to Jim's comments about the absence of representation from the developers. We have worked hard to present this as a forum that has information across the board with all perspectives. We have been very frustrated because we've tried multiple times to get the developer here, and it hasn't happened. We haven't had Vestas didn't want to be here, and Walcha Energy showed good faith in wanting to present and agreed to do so at the end of last week, but they've at the 11th hour decided they don't want to, and that's disappointing to us because we wanted to present to you an opportunity for you to be able to have questions answered, and we can't do that today. So we'll be conscious of that and be taking these questions down and trying to get answers. Having said that, we've got a great panel, and I'll just very briefly outline the panel, and then that'll save me from doing it later. But first of all, Mark Fogarty is a solicitor, small-scale renewable energy developer, and Mark will speak about disabling social licence, the New South Wales planning process, explaining the EIS process and what Walcha can do. He'll be followed by Eric Noakes, Walcha Mayor and resident, and Eric will be speaking about what the council is doing, has done already, and what it expects of the developer. Karen Zirkler, I promised I wouldn't do that. Karen Zirkler is a Kentucky farmer and community member living in an EIS environment, and we'll go through the process of what the community is doing and has done during that process. And then Peter Barton is a farmer and community member from Wellington, and he'll be talking about how the Wellington community has been impacted by the turbine projects in that area over the last 5 years. Finally, then Max Mawhinney, Walcha community member and someone with experience in project capital raising and large-scale property development. Max will speak about the context of what these projects could mean for Walcha landholders and the community. So that's enough for me, I think, and I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mark Fogarty. Thank you. We're away.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Cam, and look, it's great to be here today. I think it's fantastic attendance, and I think demonstrates the interest in what's coming forward. So it's very heartening for me. I've only got 15 minutes. I actually thought Eric was going to open the batting, but I'll do the honours. What I wanted to do very quickly, I think, was in 15 minutes. We can't go through a lot, but we can, I think, cover off some of the key things that I think are important. So I acknowledge the organisers. I think it's a fantastic idea, Cam and Jim, and a lot of the other people put a lot of work into this today, and I think I echo their thoughts about trying to get as much balance in this exercise as we possibly can, because this is the start of the beginning, or the beginning of the whole process, the Winterbourne, and as we can see, there's a hell of a lot following it. I also just acknowledge the distinguished guests, Barnaby and Adam, and traditional owners. I'm not a local, so I'm a blow-in as such, although I've been blowing in now for about 4 or 5 years. Very pleasant experience for me. I sort of sail down off the top of the Barringtons along Thunderbolt's Ray, and I just look at what's here and what's on offer in terms of the landscape and what its contribution is, and I'm in awe, and every time I don't bother to fly up, I either drive up or get the train, because what you guys have got here is very precious, and I think what we've got to do is be very careful the way that we now manage this in going forward. So much so that I decided I'd jump in and have a little bit of a look at the energy transition and at UNE and do a bit of research in it. So what's in it for the bush is the theme of what I'm looking at. Because these regions, New England, are doing a lot of the heavy lifting as we start to wind down the Hunter Valley, and so there's got to be something in it very tangible. And I think Jim sort of summarised that in his introduction. And I know some of the other speakers will talk a little bit about that, but there's got to be something very tangible, something in it for the future generations. I just quickly reflect on where I think the transition's up to. We've been meeting today with some of the government representatives that have been coming up, and they're starting to visit more frequently. They've been here, I think, last week. And my view on the outlook is it's hanging by a bit of a thread. When we have a look now at the energy outlook through to the end of the decade, and there's all sorts of hopes and promises from the current federal government, the current state government, net zeros, this and that. But if you have a look at it, I think 2025, we start to look pretty fragile. By the end of the decade, we're looking pretty fragile. So, and I don't see big pipelines of things coming on. Snowy 2 is a classic example. That's now looking quite a disaster in budgetary sense and in engineering sense. I have a look at things like Oven Mountains down here in the Macleay River. I took some time to go down there and have a little bit of a look at that as well. These things are big projects, and they're going to take a lot of money and a lot of coin coming together, and the days that we've all had of cheap energy are pretty much gone. What we've got to hope that we do have by 2025, 2029, enough kilowatt hours coming through the system so that we flick the lights and things come on. So I think we're in a very delicate situation. We see that already overseas, particularly the UK and Europe. So what I wanted to do is talk about social licence as a critical issue, of course, in going forward. It's about how do we engage with you guys, or how does the system engage with you guys? How does it get, I think, support? How does it get some, commonality going forward? How does it, I think, engender the communities to do that heavy lifting that I so described? And that's importantly, and I think particularly for this particular area in Walcha, is transparency, the ability to be able to know what's happening, where it's coming from. Everyone's been pretty busy coming out of the drought and into COVID, and not always had the time to look and to understand what is the outlook. But it's very important that you have some transparency. And I banged Eric's ear about this early in the piece, of being able to have some way for people to see who is prospecting, why they're prospecting, and having on the table some projects. Inclusion is critical. So I've been quite gobsmacked at just how big the divide is between the city and the bush. And I live in the city, but it's very, very stark in my opinion. Consultation's critical. And you know, not just a tick box consultation. And I have a look at what happened here, and we've had a few attempts to try and get consultative committees up and running, all of those sorts of things, and it sort of ran out of steam a little bit. And then most importantly, it's about acceptance. It's just not about rolling this stuff out. It's getting some acceptance of what it is. We all, I think, understand the importance of a decarbonisation process. We all understand the importance of moving to a renewable energy process, but it's about the acceptance of what that process is and what that process is going to deliver. Just quickly going into it, I don't have a lot of respect for the Planning Act. I think this government has had an opportunity to address the Planning Act. I think that all the previous coalition governments have had a chance to address the Planning Act. Hazard and all of these guys who were planning ministers in the past, and everyone opens the bonnet and puts the bonnet back down again. It's too hard. So effectively what we've got is an old act, 1979, started by Bob Carr back in the day when we had another energy transition, which was coal. And so effectively I say it's become deteriorated into very much a tick-the-box process. I tell the planning department that it's like a game of snakes and ladders. It's a development act. It's not a planning act. It's not planning anything. It's approving development. So it's snakes and ladders, but there's no snakes. People just roll the dice. They end up on a ladder and up they go, and up they go, and up they go, and ultimately they get a DA. So that has to be fixed. They did come up, I think, with a good act, the Investment Act, which they've been out and they're pushing, but they don't seem to have a realisation that the bedrock for trying to deliver that act is the Planning Act. And so that's the process you're in the middle of now. So you've got 28 days, as Cam and Jim have been saying, so it's on the bike sort of time really now, and it's going to be a big challenge, and I'm sure Karen will talk about that. She's just been through that. But we've got to do that against the fact there's been no strategic land use planning. We don't know what the Planning Act outlook is. We don't know what goes where, when and why. We don't know why Winterbourne is there. I guess it's got wind, that's an important thing, or Ruby Hills or wherever else. So nobody has actually sat at the mixing box and said, this is where we need to put this stuff. So zero strategic land use planning. There's some Latin words there, ex post facto. So what we're doing, what you guys are now doing, is you're looking backwards into an EIS. It's at 2,000, 4,000, how many pages it is. And you really look trying to make a decision on something that was selected 2 years ago. That's when it should have happened. Looking backwards now into these planning decisions extremely hard, it's extremely frustrating, and I don't think it's in the best interest of the project, the developers, or certainly the community. So environmental social assessment should occur at the outset, should occur when someone, whether it be Walcha Energy or Vestas or whoever, seizes upon the site. We should be looking there and then as to what the economic, social and environmental issues are and making some assessments. So coming back 2 years later with 28 days to try and do it is a nonsense. I say it should be subject to ticker. That's not with a K, but that's again the transparency, looking at those projects, the consultancy and the acceptance. So you're going to need a coordinated response. You're going to get dumped with a lot of paper, and there's people here that have done it before, and it's about how you coordinate with that. You've got to appreciate that Vestas and ERM are no slouches. ERM's probably the best of the consultants in this area of planning, and Vestas, of course, are a global company, so they know what they're about, and they're going to have a pretty professional document that you need to look at. A couple of the issues I'm going to talk about is the death of 1,000 cuts. That's the cumulative impact. I think the team here have done a fantastic job with the brochures that they've handed out there, but you can see from that we've got a big tsunami of projects that are starting to build up. And so what you want to see in this cumulative impact, in this EIS, is a very solid, robust examination of not just their project, but the future projects, past projects, and most important, this has happened with Thunderbelts just recently. Karen will talk about it, and I think there was an example where the developer just took a study area that was the whole of the New England. That's appropriate on a broad scale situation, but you need to tighten that up. I'll talk about that in a moment. And I have a view that LGAs, they're the masters of the land use planning. They're the ones that should be clearly involved, and that's the strategic piece of the puzzle that's absolutely missing. These people are the closest to the communities, and they've got the most ability, in my opinion, to give effect to strategic land use. And we need to ensure that it's got this meaningful assessment. So we need to say there are compounding effects that come to the table. And I think one of those here obviously was the traffic situation, and that's highlighted in the brochure. There's all sorts of other issues, the biodiversity, that are all compounds. So we need to look at that. The developer has to come back and present to you a very robust cumulative impact assessment. And I say that the study areas are important in that. As with Thunderbolt 1 in Kentucky, that was really looking at the whole of the New England. Okay, it's useful to do that because we need to know what it's going to be. But I say you need to then tighten it down. So the triangle comes into play. That's Uralla, Bendemeer, Walcha. What is the impact of all of these projects? We've highlighted, the gang here have highlighted some of those. At the top end of Thunderbolt's the solar. There's 720 megs already going in there. Proposals for another 700. So this is the cumulative impact on this is huge. So we need to think about that. And I was with John Peatfield today, and he's talking a good example of the road arteries. There's another example. We've got one, it's like a heart. We've got one main artery down the middle. We've got a lot of smaller arteries, and we can quickly clog those up with the development and things that are proposed. So I'd like to see something really robust that takes account of all of those future projects, whether they're in the planning system or not. We know a lot of the ones that are there. And then it's also getting a good baseline. So all of those issues that I've listed down here, they need to have a good baseline set, and I think this needs to be done by third parties to the process. Decommissioning and rehabilitation, I'll just quickly talk about this because this is a big issue. This is a big issue for future generations. What happens in 20 years' time? We've got stranded assets sitting there because people have gone broke. Winterbourne's now on its third owner. So Walcha Energy, Vestas and now Copenhagen Infrastructure. There's every chance there'll be two more before these projects are over. So who's going to pull these things out? Who's going to pay for those things to come out? They're not simple exercises. 150-foot towers, blades that are 100 metres long. Someone's going to have to haul these things out. You've got in the base of them concrete footings of 700 cubic metres. They have to do what the mining sector has done, or does, which is return the sites to the way it was when they came there. So we have to be really careful about how they plan for that. We need to see that in there. And we need, you know, for the landowners, I asked the question, I don't know the answer to this, but I'd be very keen to understand what have they signed up for in terms of decommissioning, because at the moment they're on the hook together with the developer. The developer goes, as I've just explained, in that sort of process, who is going to pay to have that decommissioning done? And when is it going to be done? Otherwise, we're going to be left with a lunar landscape, you know, I think highlighted by that picture before. So the last issue is just the insurance. You know, I think they've got to understand that the insurance, particularly after all the fires we've had, Black Fridays or Black Saturdays, and all of those that have happened, a lot of them have happened from combustible issues, from high voltage lines and things like that. So the host landowner just signing up to go into this, you know, hopefully they've thought through the decommissioning, and hopefully they've thought through the issue of the cumulative impact assessment. Cam, I think that's pretty much me. I'm just saying good luck, and I look forward to answering any questions. Thank you for your attendance, and again for your attention. I appreciate that.
So Mark gets 10 out of 10 for sticking to time. I didn't know whether I was expecting that or not, but there's a wealth of information that Mark has, and he's got a minefield of knowledge, and it's been a really useful resource for a lot of people. And thank you for that, Mark. And it won't be the last time we call on you, I'm sure. I'd like to introduce our Mayor, Eric Noakes, to come up, and I'll just turn this off. Or you're not presenting from this side, Eric. I'll take it away and try and prepare for the next one. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Cam, and thanks, Mark. The reason I didn't go before you was I was hoping you'd clarify around the EIS a little bit, which you did. So I think that the message that I've got from Council is that we have very little input into these projects. The EISs, we're not the determining authority with that. That is taken up by the Department of Planning and the Minister. Anything over $30 million, councils don't get a great say in how they're determined. So, and that's probably a good thing. These are massive projects, and to put them in the hands of so many councillors around Walcha or any community is probably a bit risky at times. So on that, council at this stage has formed no real position on this. We can't form a position on the Winterbourne Wind Project yet, as the EIS is not out for us to even look at. So in a lot of ways, we don't know what that project will be until you can read the EIS and actually see what's in it. We will then engage with the community in that. I know a lot of the community has already engaged through emails and letters to council over this, but just remember that those emails and letters will not form part of a submission to the EIS. You will have to, I believe, you download a form off the Department of Planning and Environment site and fill it in. So if you have sent an email in either for or against, it will need to be done again with the information fed straight into the department so that they can get enough to put it to an independent planning panel, which is his next step along if they get more than, I think, 50 submissions. But what council is doing is working with other councils who have been through this or going through this to protect our infrastructure and your infrastructure. Roads, and certainly most of the comments that come to me are around roads, what will happen to our water and our waste. Waste is a difficult one because it's very hard to build a rubbish tip and we don't want it filled up with someone else's waste. So to us, that's a pretty simple one. No matter how much they pay at this stage, we don't want any waste from this. There's not near the waste from a wind project. Apparently it was a solar, but we don't need that coming into our what we used to call a tip, and it's called something else now. gets a name change every week. Our water's the same. Like, we've been through a drought where this community, especially in town, well, everywhere, suffered from water, but council control the town water. We've just got bulldozers out there now building our new water storage. It's a pretty exciting time, but don't think that we will be selling that water to wind developers. We won't have enough by the time these projects come. We don't want to risk our water. There is legislative problems there too around using what's utility water or town water for construction, which you legally can't do. So we won't be giving up the water for this town for these projects, so we'll have to find their water elsewhere. Roads are the big one. I know roads are a big one whether wind farms are coming or not. But, you know, we do the best we can, but we don't want them wrecked by oversized loads. So we're really working hard on a road infrastructure agreement. The first one we got from a developer was about 3 pages long. The one that our general manager's up to at the moment is 70 pages long. It will be a comprehensive document that will cover us and all of our costs, and whoever does the work, whether it's contractors or not. Our roads should come out of this a lot better than they are now. For whichever projects go ahead. It's got to remember that this project is a little bit different to somewhere like the Glen Innes one, where they had what they called a spine, ran from Glen Innes to Inverell. That road carried most of the traffic. This one here, these trucks are getting right into the end of our small local roads. They'll need widening in places, corners will need widening, and people think, oh, it's great to have wider roads, but if you have wider roads, every time you go to grade them, it takes longer, it costs more money. So, you know, it's not always a win-win for them to get wider roads. We're engaging through, and this has sort of been led by Sam Copeland, the Mayor of Armidale, who's here somewhere, I don't know where, but up the back there. Sam is leading us very well with a Renewable Energy Zone council for the New England region. 5 councils in that, us, Uralla, Armidale, Glen Innes and Inverell. And that's around some things we won't give up, and that's to do with there's a statement of expectations around the community fund, local engagement and the decommissioning bond. These are the things that we see as important for the long-term future of our councils, that we can't have these big projects coming in. And you heard the numbers of the amount of money these things make. We want a share of that money for the community if they come. You know, that's very important to us. On top of that, we're sort of also engaging in a coalition of regional energy mayors, which will take in the Arana Res councils too. A lot of them have got a lot of experience in this. We don't really have a chance here to make a mistake with our road agreements and these sort of things. We rely on those other councils to tell us what they've learned, what they've done wrong, and what's worked for them. So it's important we do that. The last thing I wanted to talk about, and I spoke to Doug Lanfear about this yesterday. Doug's the project leader of the Winterbourne Wind Farm, who we are talking to on a regular basis. And originally what's a voluntary planning agreement, or we can call it the community fund, or whatever we want to call it, was 5% of that project. And I personally couldn't see how that would work, because it didn't have the governance around it that it needed. So that went, and then they offered $750,000 a year to the community for this project. $1 million, sorry, when the project gets its DA, if it gets its DA, and then $750,000 for the community. But out of that, $200,000 of that was to go to what they called near neighbours. They didn't have to give that. It was I don't know what you'd call it, but they thought it was a good idea to give it to the neighbours who weren't impacted heavily by it. They called that part of the community fund, and we argued that it's not part of a community fund. That's got to be pulled out and bring it back to $550,000 for transparency. But we also argued that the whole $750,000 should go to the councils where the project was. And yesterday, Doug rang me and said we've got to win with that. So if this project goes ahead, the whole $750,000 will go to council, and everybody probably thinks, oh, what's council going to do with it? But it'll be set up. There's a lot of governance and everything to do around that. It won't be just a thing that goes into council coffers. It'll be a a lot of governance set up there around possibly a 355 committee or something like that that will make recommendations to council as to where to use that money. Some people say that it should be a community group, but you ask then, how is a community group really answerable to the community? So that's why it's going through council in the long run. You have 8 councillors there that you've elected. If you don't think they're doing a good job with that part of the money, you have the right to vote them out next election. Whereas with a community group, it doesn't quite work that way, that these things, and you do tend to, and anecdotally when you look about, end up with a lot of barbecues and barbecue trailers and playgrounds and this sort of thing, which for a whole community benefit is not there. So we've got a long way to go with what we do with that money if this project goes ahead, but it also sets the standard of what we will be expecting of any other projects that come into this area, and it'll come back to a dollar per megawatt of electricity generated, or a lot of dollars per megawatt of electricity generated. So just be assured that while we're not the consenting authority, we don't have any pull in this area. We can't, demand things off the department or anything like that. But we try and work with the department. We're trying to work with Energy Corporation, who are in charge of doing the res, to get the best for this community out of whatever comes. And, still open to suggestions from people or send in, anything you want to know that council's doing. But as I said, if you're looking to council to change the direction of this, we can't really do much in that area. It's not our area. It's the community that's going to have to push for or against these projects. I think that's about all. If there's any questions, that'll be done later, but all for the moment. Thanks, Cam, and I'm probably a bit under time, hopefully, but someone else can take over time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Eric, and as you alluded to, there's still a lot of things to work out, but that's given us a really good update. Our next speaker is Karen Zirkler, and Karen's been working with the Kentucky community. I've just got to work out how to expand that again. And I can only do one thing at a time. I can't talk and concentrate at the same time. I'll take this opportunity to just thanks for the gratitude. It's really been much more the Timms family and Kate Girac and Mish Lucic who's had a lot to do with the setting up of this. And I must have been late to an organising meeting and was put into this spot. So more likely hard work from them than me. There you are. Thanks, Cara.
Thank you, Cam. I brought my paper copy just in case. Thank you very much. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners and the dignitaries that we have in the audience tonight, and all of the community members who've turned out. What a great crowd. So living in an EIS environment, that means Environmental Impact Statement environment. Where's the up and down buttons? Can't find the arrow. Oh, there it is. No? Got it. By way of background, I just thought I'd paint a bit of a picture of where I've come from, who I am. I'm from... Environment and farming are in my DNA. I come from a family farming background where during the 1970s my dad was one of the first to implement strip farming to take care of soil erosion on the Liverpool Plains. And that became a land use scale change. It's not happening there anymore like that, but that was a land use scale change. In the 1980s, I completed an environmental science degree, and my focus, interestingly, was how wind erosion and drought in eastern Australia correlate with the El Nino and the Southern Oscillation Index. That seems to be playing out a little bit now too. The 1990s, I did a lot of work with the Department of Primary Industries in Queensland and with Edith Cowan University in Western Australia, working with landholders about extension methodologies that work for landholders. And then in 1998, I landed a job with Southern New England Landcare here in the New England area, and I've worked with lots and lots of landholder groups where, you know, I guess the vision there was to lead, connect and enable communities to make the changes that they wanted to make on their local patch. In 2005, my husband and I purchased where we are at Kentucky, over there on the highway, opposite Kyabra, if anybody knows where that property is. And we do lots of regenerative agriculture type activities there. The picture is me getting a bit brave and riding my 4-year-old baby horse in a climate rally in Sydney in about, I think it was 2018. Farmers for Climate Action, and Time to Choose. So you can see I'm a bit on both sides here. In 2020, I was lucky enough to be appointed by the Minister to the New South Wales Biodiversity Conservation Trust Board. So, you know, I'm someone who cares very deeply about the environment and farming and about communities, actually. So a bit of context about the Kentucky situation. We were impacted by a very serious lack of planning and engagement. Basically, a lack of land use scale planning by the state government, and Mark's touched on that very nicely. Thank you, Mark. Secondly, a lack of quality community engagement by the developer in our situation. So basically this has brought us to a point where we've got foreign corporates deciding where these very large large-scale wind, mostly the wind is what perspective I'm coming from, and they're installations, they're not farms. So this has created an awful lot of division in our local community over at Kentucky. We had no input on the SEERS. Okay, you might say, what's a SEERS? A SEERS is the Secretary's Environmental Assessment Requirements. That is a document that identifies what information needs to go into the environmental impact statement. And that document is sent to your local government authority by the state, the Department of Planning. In our situation, we deal in our project wasn't on your map, Mark, up there. So add another blob to that map. And that blob crosses 3 different local government areas. Most of our project, the Thunderbolt project, is actually in the Tamworth Regional Council area, so I'm a bit disappointed that they're not part of that council group, and also a bit disappointed that I don't think they're here tonight, somebody said. So we had a bit of a challenge there in engaging all of the various local government organisations, very time consuming for community members. In one of those situations, the staff in the local government organisation didn't ask councillors to have input into the SEERS, so that basically meant that the community didn't have any input into the SEERS. So our community was put under a lot of strain. So we had, this was a result of all of those things that are up there, inadequate community engagement plan by the developer. There really was not a very thorough plan put together by the developer. Consultation was right through the whole 3 years of COVID. The Community Consultative Committee actually refused to meet with community members on 2 occasions that I can remember, stating that's not our role. The drop-in sessions that they conducted were actually outside of the key impact area. And there was one Zoom session in particular that I remember where a couple of us were nominated by our community group to actually attend that Zoom and ask some questions. We were muted. I don't know if you all understand how Zoom works, but they just pushed the mute button and we couldn't ask any questions. We were denied requests, letters, emails asking for public meetings like this one where they attended, denied. And in the end, there were no neighbour agreements really developed up that were facilitated by the developer. So what did we do? We relied on the power of community, and a couple of groups formed up. So in 2017, when the community was first approached, a group formed to negotiate with the developer, and that group sort of quickly became a hosts-only group because the community ended up becoming fairly complacent. A lot of time passes by, people just sort of forget about things. That group was really good and useful in negotiating terms and the very best of deals for the potential host landholders. It became named the Thunderbolt Energy Hub. But after 3 years, there really still was no real negotiation process that was facilitated by the developer. The group ended up weakening and splitting when a second developer came in and made a better proposal to half of the group. And so that's the southern half of the group broke off and actually became the Bendermere Renewable Energy Hub. And I don't know that that's on your picture either, Mark. So this put huge stress on the community. So by February 2020, an action group formed up, and that action group, its main goal was to raise awareness of what was going on, and that became known as the Friends of Kentucky Action Group. So this is the part where I tell you what this group has done. I've been a member of both of those groups. I am still a member of the Friends of Kentucky Action Group, and I'm a member of the Red for New England group as well. FOCAG, we thought that was a pretty cool name. Probably needed a slightly different ending, but anyway. Meets regularly. It uses knowledge and resources from other groups that are further along in the process, and we really would like to acknowledge especially the Hills of Gold group at Nundle, who are further ahead in this process, and they really have been very generous in sharing in good spirit their experiences and their knowledge. We got ourselves a free Google Workspace with an email address and file storage. This allows multiple group members to manage the information flow. We created a social media presence. We formed a communications team so that we could, multiple people could manage everything. We made a petition, and we did that online, as well as then turning that online petition into a paper format so that we could actually use it with people who didn't have access to internet, which is quite a lot of people at Kentucky. We have shocking internet access, can I just say. We wrote to our state and federal members to ask for their support on numerous occasions. We tried to meet with them as well, and we did that fairly successfully. And we prepared lots of, posters, brochures, materials to help raise awareness in the community. So the EIS went on public exhibition. I forget the date, but I remember the closing date. It was the end of May. And this was an interesting process. The group really was there encouraging, promoting the community to review and make submissions. So that's sort of where you're almost up to here, I believe, with the project that's been talked about tonight. The amount of work in this should not be underestimated. Big, bold, underlined, it's shocking. This period really did put significant strain on community group members and community members on the whole. It's a really big, tough gig on your mental health. I mean, just have a think about this. We'd just come through the massive drought. We had the massive fires. We had the massive mouse plagues. We had the massive floods. We had the big storms. We had more floods. We had goodness knows what else. I can't even remember them all. And now we've got a res. So keep on going, guys. It's a strain. Time is of the essence, and the other speakers have already mentioned this. Developers take years and years in some cases to put these pages and pages, I should have taken a photo for you, of the EIS document itself. You get 28 days. 28 days. And guess what? You've got sport on the weekend, and you've got this and that, you've got family stuff, and you've got your job, and you've got your farm. You've got to fit it in. You just have to drop everything and fit it in. The Department of Planning and Environment, they won't budge on extensions. We tried them. They won't. The EIS, I'm horrified if yours is 4,000 pages. Ours was 600 and that was bad enough. 20 appendices that you've got to go through. The developer provided us with USB sticks because it was too big to print. I mean, we did print a set for our group because lots of our group don't have computers and don't have internet access or very good at internet access. It took a whole box this big to carry it. And that was just one copy that we then shared around. That cost a small fortune to print too. We then split it up and got ourselves organised to review it and record any issues. And you may be shocked at some of the things you read in there, things that you would never think would be written down on paper. So get organised, share the load and support each other. That is the biggest thing you need to do, is to support each other. We made presentations to Uralla Shire Council and Tamworth Regional Council. We unfortunately ran out of time to present to Walcha. And we requested that the local government organisations that we met with, we requested those two things, that there was proper regional scale land use planning involving hosts, neighbours of hosts, the whole community. That hasn't really happened with this whole res zone thing. And we did actually request a moratorium on large-scale wind until this planning has been completed. So from January, this is an interesting number, you know, the $250,000, that's what we calculated our community, our little community, put in between January 2020 and May 2022, when the EIS period closed, in our volunteer time. You know, we're already busy people, but that's how much time we spent extra. So when you go to make your submissions, and this is the stuff you have to learn from other groups, because nobody actually tells you this. Every person and every business can make a submission. So if you're a farm and you have a farm business name and 2 adults, for example, in that farm business, that's 3 submissions. Submissions must be unique. You can't just make 3 copies of that same submission and submit it. They have to be unique and from that individual entity's viewpoint. Submissions are then categorised as comments, support, or object. You have to choose one of those when you make your submission. So in our case, we had 7 comments, we had 14 in support of the project, and we had the record-breaking 98 objections. And one of those objections was Uralla Council. We had more than 50, and Eric hasn't mentioned this, it's not just more than 50 submissions that you have to get to trigger the IPC, the Independent Planning Commission. It's more than 50 objections to trigger that IPC. If that's your goal, it's pretty nail-biting for 28 days. Yeah. We uncovered in that... how am I going for time? Because I could skip through some of this if I'm too over time. Right. In reading that environmental impact statement, we uncovered quite a lot of interesting stuff. For example, prior to felling trees where koalas were located, the EIS suggested, and I quote, shaking of habitat trees with heavy machinery as appropriate to encourage fauna to abandon the trees. Compare that to your livestock health and welfare rules and regulations. The Department of Environments did make a submission on the EIS, and that submission, it was one of the comment submissions, it identified 22 shortfalls in the NEON's EIS biodiversity assessment, including using incorrect figures in the BAM calculator. Now, the BAM calculator is the biodiversity assessment method that they use. So you've got to be onto them. Our investigations of the EIS also uncovered non-compliance. So our community actually commissioned an independent review of the noise assessment part of the environmental impact statement, and it found a whole range of issues and problems. Turbine model wasn't confirmed. No consideration of alternative layouts. There were residents that weren't even identified in their mapping. There was no consideration of the cumulative effects of other proposals. That's required, but they didn't do that. Background noise measurements were inappropriate. Inappropriate equipment was used. Wind speed assumptions were wrong. The Met mast was 48 kilometres away. There was no cross-season measurements, so they measured in one season but forgot about the other three. The noise model was incorrectly used and underestimated the impact on surrounding community. The predictions were used instead of actual test results and figures from test results, and the sound power level that they used was lower than that of the candidate turbine, because the candidate turbine actually hadn't been identified properly. So the conclusion of the independent consultant was that it was incomplete, deficient, premature, just shouldn't have even been submitted, let alone approved. So the current state of play with this, recently you may have heard Northern Tableland's Adam Marshall's delivery of the ultimatum, telling them to either listen to the community and dramatically adjust their project or just bugger off out of the region. I caught the last part of that interview on the ABC radio, and I was doing a little dance all the way to work that day. The 98 objections were record-breaking according to those comments by Adam. And Adam met with the Energy Minister, Minister Keane, and Energy Corporation on the 9th of August, telling them that our region's not just a mat to wipe their boots on as they pass through. The company's now got to rework their proposal, but there seems to, in some of the conversations I've just had here just this evening, there's this sort of misconception perhaps that the project is dead no longer. That is not the case, according to what my understanding is. It is still part of the planning process. It's still in the portal as having, it's up to the stage where it's got to respond to all of those 98 plus, submissions. So they still have the right to respond to all of those and then carry on. And my understanding is that that the IPC would be triggered, and that would be the next step. But who knows? How long does it take to respond to 98 objections plus all of the other comments that were involved in that? It's going to take a long time. So who knows how long this whole process is going to drag on for? Getting towards the end now, Cam. So our group, from our group's perspective, our group wanted me to present we believe that we need to present some better alternatives. So at the National Landcare Conference the other morning, the Honourable Tanya Plibersek, Minister for Environment and Water at the federal level, spoke, and she announced, I was so excited when I heard her talking about this, and I started recording, but it was a bit too late. She was talking about the cumulative impacts of developments and the need for regional scale land use planning. And she's intending to talk to her state counterparts right across Australia, because this is not just a problem here, and actually push for these two things to be addressed. Now, I know from my work with Landcare and landholders over many, many years, especially in this region, we're proficient at farm planning. We're even proficient and have done heaps of catchment planning with Landcare and local land services over the years. Since the mid-1990s, we've been doing catchment planning. We can do that. We could be leaders in regional scale land use planning. There's no reason why we can't. We've got the skills, we've got the facilitators to do that. So our group believes that we can do this, but we could do it even better if we had government support to do it. Turbine technology is already being superseded overseas. Community-led embedded microgrids are the most efficient renewables, and they profit regional areas of Australia. That is a direct quote from Professor Alastair Sprout of the University of New South Wales School of Photovoltaic and Renewable Energy Engineering. He presented at one of the forums in Armidale several months ago. ARENA stands for the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. I think it's agency at the end. They have $50 million grants, or $50 million in grants, I should say, under their Regional Australia Microgrids program for pilot studies and projects in regional areas across Australia to assist us. Our region has already got a bit of experience in this area and the willpower to look into this sort of stuff. We've got a group at Uralla called ZNet. This is what they've been on about for 10 years or so now. And, you know, is this a light bulb moment? Is this time for us to get it right before it's too late and before irreversible damage is done? I'd just like to leave you with one thought along those lines. You know, this could be one idea, that's just my one idea that I've thought of, and goodness knows how many other ideas that are out there in the room right now. I think we need a regional dialogue about all of this, and here's my little piece of input. If every piece of existing infrastructure, every structure that already exists, the one we're sitting in and all the others like it, city and country, so we all play our part in this. If every structure that could support solar panels or another form of technology that might be out there should do so, because the biodiversity and the farmland and the soil underneath it is already gone. We already don't have it anymore. Why don't we do that as an alternative to destroying more? And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. There's a huge amount of thought-provoking stuff there, and I'd urge us all to write a few questions down as we're going through, because when we finally get the opportunity to ask questions, we might not have the foremost in our mind. But through that, I sort of heard that it's a very difficult, and I applaud the effort that you've gone to over the last few years. But it's a very laborious process that you've been going through, and the difficulty we have is we're not lobbyists, we're not trained in this. We don't really, I don't think anyone thinks they have much time, but we don't have time to be used on that, and so it's a very daunting prospect, and we're working as volunteers against huge corporations here that are very professional in their work. So it's a difficult thing to get the balance right on that one, and that was my take. It's a pretty daunting process, but having said that, I know Pete's gone through the process, and I'd just like to introduce him to talk about his experience down at Wellington. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, Cameron. Oh, look at you, we've got a lot of people here. That's an unbelievable roll-up. Thank you, Karen, for that presentation. You and your community have obviously put in an enormous amount of work, and I wish you the best of luck. Just an introduction to who I am. I'm Peter Barton. I live between Wellington and Mudgee, a little place called 12 Mile. I went to Armidale Uni. I did ag economics at Armidale Uni. I graduated in 1986, I think, or 85. Then I worked as a futures trader in Sydney and returned to the family farm in the late 80s. I finished I was quite lucky. I finished my job on the Futures Exchange the Friday before Black Tuesday, when the share market crash happened, and a lot of my contemporaries lost a lot of money. But I missed that day. After coming back onto the farm, as a lot of the older farmers here would be aware, it was a very hard time in agriculture. The floor price disappeared. We shot a lot of each other's sheep. It was a very hard way to make a living. Then about 20 years ago, a few fellas started to turn up around the Wellington area talking about wind turbines. Initially, I thought, well, this probably isn't too bad an idea, because it's a way for a farm to get non-agricultural income off his land, as well as being able to run his livestock. So I was reasonably supportive of it, and the first wind farm, I think, started to go round and round circles about 10, maybe 12 years ago. There's 36 turbines. We in the Wellington Dubbo area is also a part of the Renewable Energy Hub, or whatever they call it, and we have a couple of quite large solar farms. One of them is about 2,000 acres, and I think it's about to go to 3,500 acres, and the other one's about 1,500 acres. And there's a couple more wind farms proposed. One was supposed to start construction this year, but it's been held up for COVID, wet weather. There's a lot of work that goes into it, as the Shire President was talking about in the road construction, to enable these enormous contraptions to be moved to where they've got to go. And as you may or may not be aware, what happened in our area, initially the one they wanted me to be involved with, they proposed to have 370 wind farms or turbines. They came to me, it was funny, I've told a few people this, but at the time I was, my wife had died a few years before and I was on my own, and they turned up in the car and bloke jumped out, and the two of the most gorgeous looking girls turned up, and they had a plate full of cakes, and they sat down and said, made me a cup of coffee in my own kitchen, and I'm thinking, this is fantastic. And the fella said, all you've got to do is sign this bit of paper. We'll give you $1,000 a year for every year that, we're doing this thing. It might never go ahead. And you have no obligation to ever put a wind farm on your place. And so I thought to talk to a few of my neighbours, and they said, oh yeah, money for jam, you get $1,000. And I thought, yeah, well, I might do that. I'll ring the bloke. And I said, well, I'll sign up as long as you make sure you bring those girls out again next time. But in hindsight, for any of you that are thinking, turbine construction was supposed to be 365 when it's going to start, which I think will be sometime next year. I think it'll end up being 55 turbines. So anyone who's got this, they start off, that's the way they sort of work. It's a funny setup, the way the developers work. That's why they're not here. They don't like talking to groups. They want to see you on your own. They go to your door and they want you there on your own, if preferably, or there with your wife, or as few people as possible. And then when the information comes out, the information only goes to the people who are supposedly supporting them. And as Karen knows, it's very hard to get that information. You don't find out that information, which is readily available to the people who are planning to maybe host or supposedly supporting the companies. And just to point out there, initially I was reasonably supportive of the idea. The positives of the wind turbines, as I see them, is that it's increased income for the landholders, and also the community fund, which the Shire President talked about. That exists in Wellington for the 32 turbine wind construction we have at the moment, and it's a significant amount of money which goes into community groups which need support. There were some local jobs during construction, but not nearly as many as were promised. The roads, where they're going to, are obviously improved significantly and have to be maintained because of they've got to go up and check that they don't have cracks in the wings and things, and check that they're all working, so the roads are maintained. The negatives that I've observed is I don't think there's any local long-term jobs. The people that maintain them, I'm not sure where they come from, but I'm guessing they probably come from Newcastle or somewhere, but it's a specialty area that they're in. There was no real boom during the construction of the wind farms, whereas with the solar panels it certainly was a boom for Wellington, with the number of labourers there, and disruption during construction with these enormous trucks moving at very slow speeds. It's very hard to move livestock or grain, or even just get to the school bus, those sort of things which will happen while they're building them. But the worst negative of any which I observed with the first wind farm was how it turned neighbours against neighbours. Neighbours that had been friends and neighbours for up to 4 generations, and who were good friends. And now where I come from, we have once a month we have Spices Creek drinks, and it's Spices Creek Bushfire Brigade. And once a month you put on free grog and a bit of food for all your neighbours. And when you do that, you will not get the 2 people come at the same time. And one of the fellows was telling me the other day he hasn't spoken to him for 10 years now, since the wind farms have gone up. And that I see as the worst of the worst. You know, we're a small community, maybe a fraction larger than Walcha, but not as knitted as Walcha is, being where it is, the top of the range. And by doing that, it's been horrible to observe. And leading on from that, the next project that I had a bit to do with, because they gave me $1,000, so I was in the loop, and they wanted to put the power line through me or another bloke. They ended up putting it through him, but we had a lot of power, and I said, we've got to make sure that all the neighbours are looked after. And so a process was set up where there was a couple of older landholders who were surrounded by them, and they've been financially well compensated for the lack of the ability to possibly sell their land or to considerable discount, which they probably would have had to have done, and also a situation where rather than just being paid for where the wind farm is on the land, they put a big circle around it, and if you happen to be in that circle, then you get a proportion of the money from it. So even though the neighbour might not be in support of it, at least they're getting something for them being there. And those sort of things, I advise the council and whoever, because these things are going ahead. You know, we think we can fight them, but you talk to the average person in Sydney and they see us as the wilderness, and they see the wind farms as majestic, and they've been sold this idea that green energy is going to be the saviour for the planet. You know, and they don't care if all of Walcha was covered by wind farms, but if you put up enough of a stink, you'll certainly get the number of wind farms to be decreased in size, and the solar farms, and the detriment to members of the community will be decreased. Other thing that I've observed over the time that this has all gone on is there's been enormous changes occurred in the last 15 years, which it always does, but I think with the world as it is, the changes are probably more pronounced. Ag land in Wellington and probably around Walcha has increased at least threefold. The value of farm produce, cattle have gone up 4 times in value, sheep and lambs 3 times in value, crops 2 to 3 times in value. Wind turbines have got larger. The next wind turbines that are going to be down in Wellington will be 2/3 as big as as big as the existing ones that are there, and the payment to the landholders hasn't increased by a proportionate amount. I see the potential for just hearing pub talk and the ABC radio. I think we're probably on the verge of accepting nuclear energy in Australia. You know, the world is a different spot than it was 5 years ago, and it's not going to change quickly. You know, the price of oil, the price of gas, the price of coal, the wind farms, the solar panels cannot produce baseline power. As well as that, at the moment, in the last 15 years, biodiversity offsets have become a tradable option and a very lucrative one. Also, carbon farming is becoming mainstream, or soon to become. Okay, now the last bit I've got here is things to be wary of. First one is that annual payment at the start, which I got hooked in. Do not take the money. I don't care if they're giving you $20,000, do not take it. Because that buying the silence is playing into their hands. Try very hard to keep... If you're going to have the wind farms, make sure that the neighbours are recompensed to some level, so that the community isn't drawn torn to pieces like it has been to a degree in certain areas of ours. And those who want to sell their farms to be compensated, because as much as anyone tells you, it certainly does devalue the value of your land. The other one is when you're dealing with as was touched on, you deal with local companies, but they're just agents for overseas conglomerates which own these turbines, and they probably don't even know where Walcha is or where Wellington is, and they don't care. It's all a money thing to them, and when they come to their use-by date, which could be very soon, as has been touched on by other speakers, the big risk I see is who's going to decommission them. I can't see them coming up with the money. And that is a risk. And the money you're getting paid is just not enough. In today's terms, it is way not enough. And the Mayor was touching on the recompense they're offering them. To me, when I was talking to our council, I said, you know what, you should be going to I'm saying, okay, you give us the average of what one turbine makes every year as payment to the community, you know. And, oh no, we can't do that. No, but that to me, that should be somewhere near the level. So that's about all I've got to say, and I look forward to any questions after.
Thank you, Peter. I would really appreciate that history of what's happened at Wellington and how it's impacted you and the people around you. You better strap yourselves in. There might be a few numbers here, so we just need to pay attention, and I'll just get that sorted out again. But Max has an experience with capital raising and property development on a bit of an industrial scale, and that's meant that he's got a bit of perspective around what could be available to landholders or what should be available to landholders, and if you go down this path, what you might be able to arm yourself as far as knowledge and negotiating power to help yourself out in that scenario. Thanks, mate.
Thanks. Which button will I press you go on?
Just a space bar.
Space bar. Thanks, mate.
You're a pretty enough fella, so leave it there for a minute.
Hey?
You're a pretty enough fella, so leave it there.
This photo was obviously taken yesterday. What a great turnout. Just shows the strength of the Walcha community with all these people turning up, and it's terrific that people are taking a real interest in this whole process. So, yeah, look forward to talking to you. So my background originally was I've been in farming for 40 years, but I've also been involved in large-scale industrial and commercial development in Sydney, building facilities for people like Canon, Sony, Department of Admin Services, BHP, etc. So in that process, I actually dealt a lot with leases with top-tier legal firms in Sydney, and we use top-tier legal firms ourselves. So that whole process, I've got some background, but I haven't been involved in for a number of years now, but I thought I might have a little bit to add. So just going back to this whole exercise with the sell-off of the coal-fired power stations. So in September 2015, the New South Wales government sold the Vales Point Power Station on Lake Macquarie to Trevor St John company, Sunset Power International, for $1 million. Sorry, not a lot of money. He had some obligations to make good, etc. at the end of that. In 2019-20 financial year, Sunset reported an after-tax profit of $134.7 million. That's an after-tax profit, and declared a dividend. Sorry, $96.8 million for that year, and declared a dividend of $30 million. In 1920 financial year, they reported that after-tax profit $134.7 million, and a dividend of $62 million. The spot price of energy, as reported by the Australian Energy Regulator for those years, was about $85 per megawatt hour. The spot price in the 2021 financial year, which is actually the weighted average for the whole year on a half-hour intervals, was $144 per megawatt hour. Now, that number is not impacted by Ukraine war or any other external influences, except for simply the demand internationally for energy, for gas prices, coal prices, etc. The spot price of the most recent quarter reported by the Australian Energy Regulator was for the April, May, June quarter, just gone, was $321 per megawatt hour, which is quite a considerable increase over the last 3 or 4 years. Going back to about 1999, the spot price for electricity was $21 a megawatt hour. So you can see that the cost of energy is escalating pretty dramatically. I think no doubt Mr St John would be quite happy with his investment for $1 million, and he's done quite well, I think. Why do I raise this? There was a lot of money in the production and sale of energy. clearly. In September of 2018, we were approached by Mark Waring with a documented proposal to give his company, Mirrors Wind Proprietary Limited, an exclusive option to investigate the feasibility of developing wind turbines on our land. The term of the option was to be 7 years. The payment proposed was $1,000 or $2.78 per week. Waring also wanted a 30-day first right of refusal to buy or nominate a buyer in the event that we offered our property for sale. Waring indicated that each turbine site would generate a rental to us of $30,000 per annum. It was never quite spelled out in black and white terms, but that was the indication at the time. We naturally declined this very generous offer. At the time of this approach, the average spot price published by the Australian Energy Regulator was around $85 per megawatt hour. As previously noted, the spot price for the whole of the financial year 2021 was $144 per megawatt hour, and for the quarter just gone, $321 per megawatt hour. That is 3.7 times the price at the time of Waring's approach. This graph shows the growth in energy prices state by state. You'll note that the 2020 period at $50 per megawatt hour was in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, when factories were shut, office buildings were empty, power usage went down quite dramatically, and of course it's since spiked right up to the current level of $350 for Queensland for the last quarter and $321 for New South Wales. So power's getting dearer. You'll all be aware of the problems that, and the woes that the UK has experienced with energy shortages and prices. So from a capped household price of £1,230, Ofgem, which is the UK regulator, has increased the cap price effective October 1, 2022, very shortly, to £3,549, with a forecast that the cap price will likely be £7,263 by April 23. Now that's about $12,500 Australian dollars for a household in the UK. I think imagine a family on a tight budget with these type of price increases. It'd be very, very difficult to survive if you're a pensioner and you're hit with $12,000 a year power price. That's unimaginable. It impacts your whole life and your ability to heat your home. You've got to make decisions whether you heat your house and don't eat, or you eat and don't heat the house. Spain's rationing electricity. South Africa is rationing electricity. France energy prices hit €1 of 654 this month. Belgium 561.94 in euro this month. Germany and Denmark, which are the darlings of the renewables, are now over €800, despite having almost 30,000 wind turbines in Germany and over 6,000 wind turbines in Denmark. Excuse me. And government representatives of these EU countries are suggesting that power prices will hit extreme levels with sustained high prices of 5 to 10 years. I heard today that Germany's Ford contracts are now over €1,000 per megawatt hour of electricity, which is a huge amount of money. They are obviously impacted by the Ukraine war more than other countries, but for instance, Spain is not impacted. Spain does not buy power from the Ukraine, so they're not impacted by that. So there's currently 195 coal-fired power stations being built around the world at the moment, mostly in Asia, with China building about 95 of these. So still a very, very significant numbers of coal-fired power stations still being developed. We're taking the opposing approach, we're shutting them down. As New South Wales rapidly approaches the closure of the state's now privately owned coal-fired power stations, we'll have similar price pressure to what is occurring overseas. I think Mark expressed it very well that the thread is getting very thin and tight, and in a few years' time we'll have closures of power stations, but we won't have sufficient power being generated to cover the amount of energy that those power stations deliver. So we're going to have high energy prices for years. This creates an opportunity for landholders to seek a much higher rent for wind turbine sites, and for the Walcha community, I think, to gain a more equitable share of the revenue that wind turbine proponents will enjoy. I think this is really, really critical, important that the benefits are spread far and wide within the community, and not just with a handful of people who benefit directly from these wind turbines. Based on the information contained in winterbournefarm.com.au, and you're all just going to look it up, website, the Winterbourne, you'll be directed, by the way, to Vestas when it comes to the Winterbourne project. The Winterbourne project will host 119 wind turbines with a forecast cost of $1 billion. For my numbers, I use 1.5 billion, a bit of inflation in construction costs, etc. And they're suggesting the production of 2.1 million megawatt hours of saleable energy. And then based on information on running costs of these wind turbines, I've assumed a cost per turbine of $50,000 per turbine. Excuse me. Based on the conservative 2021 spot price of $144 per megawatt hour, and bear in mind this is pre-Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that would produce a profit before financing costs, land rental and tax of $296 million. That's $296 million out of that wind farm. If land rental was $250,000 per turbine site, net profit before tax and financing would equal $266 million, roughly. The impact of land rentals for the turbines does not make a significant difference to the profitability of these projects. This represents an after-tax profit after allowing a 30% notional tax, etc., of $186 million net profit after tax for that wind farm. That's a project payback period of 8 years, which is pretty spectacular. At a spot price, and bear in mind those prices were done at $144 per megawatt hour. If you take this current price of $321 per megawatt hour, those numbers become quite obscene. So very, very large turnover, loss of margin for the developers in that whole process. The Western Downs Regional Council, which is located in Dorby and Chinchilla area of Queensland, has introduced a specific rating for wind farms and solar farms. You can go to the Western Regional Downs Council website and look it up. 1 to 20 megawatts will attract a rating of 15,500 per annum, 20 to 50, 42,000, 50 to 100 megawatt, 72,000. So if you have signed an agreement without the provision for the lessee to pay this cost, this will be a direct hit to your revenue in the likely event that local councils introduce a similar charge to offset some of the millions of dollars in road damage caused by the heavy traffic passing through the Walcha roads and Irala, etc., etc. To enable the broader Walcha community to share in the economic outcome of wind and solar farms in a more equitable way, I think a revenue sharing model needs to be established sooner than later to remove some of the potential inequities in what will inevitably be a divisive issue. I would hope that in a couple of years or 5 years' time that this community could still come together and talk to each other without the bitterness and infighting that is probably likely to occur, unfortunately. Finally, I just wanted to touch on some of the negotiated positions that I think you should seek if you are going to go ahead with a wind farm. First of all, it's your land, so you're in a strong position to dictate terms. Don't think you're not. You would want to have an enduring bank guarantee for the term of that lease plus a bit extra, or a cash deposit for the life of the wind turbine equal to the time-adjusted costs of demolition and complete make good of the site. In other words, as the cost escalates of demolishing that turbine, you need to have a top-up to meet that cost. Now, obviously, developers will complain bitterly about that, and they wouldn't think it's a very good idea at all, but I think without it, I think you shouldn't go ahead. The lessee should agree before you and start negotiating, the lessee being the operator, to pay all your legal costs together with any other costs relating to this lease, such as surveys, registration and title adjustments, stamp duties, etc. A restriction over the use of easements for overhead and underground power in the event of, say, a second underground cable being required. This should be a new lease with additional payments, not buried in the same easement at the same cost. Require the lessee to repair any subsidence from trenching or damage to access roads. If you dig a big trench, the first thing that happens when you fill it back up, it subsides and you're left with a big hole in your paddock. And who knows what roads they'll require to put turbines up and how they'll be maintained. An undertaking obliging the lessee to provide a clear certificate relating to weeds and pests. In other words, they're coming on your land. You're entitled to have biosecurity regulations, exercised and make sure that they're abided by and that they have a certificate in a little box every time they enter your property. Should also provide you a copy of a notification to actually wash their cars or vehicles properly every day or every time they come on site. An obligation to pay for mustering costs in the event the gates are left open, and in Queensland gas belts this has happened a lot. City origin employees, they don't understand, they don't give a damn. They drive through, leave the gate open. So it should be a punitive cost of say $1,000 an hour, because it's not just getting the two mobs together and splitting them up how you originally thought they were, but sometimes it might be your critical top line of heifers that you suddenly got boxed with your bulls or something like that. So it's going to be more damaging than just the costs or time taken to go and muster a paddock and split the mob. There should be an annual review of rental to at least the CPI or some other method of increasing the rent, because the value of money declines as time goes on, as we all know. The rental to commence on the date of the lease, date of execution of lease rather, not when the turbines are built. Rental to also continue for the full term of the lease regardless if the turbine is still operating or not. Any additional rates, taxes or charges of any type that are introduced by whatever authority to be borne by the lessee. In other words, if you signed up a lease today at, let's say, $50,000, Walcha Council introduced a tax of $20,000 per turbine 3 years down the track, that comes off your rental. That's your cost, unless you have it clearly defined that is a lessee cost responsibility. And a firm ongoing commitment in the event that facility remains on the site for longer than the originally envisaged lease term, and how that ongoing occupation of your land might operate. And the most important points, I think, is collaborate with all neighbours to present a united front, not be picked off individually by these corporations which employ people that just specialise in exactly that. And engage a legal firm that's competent in the specialised area. This is not something that is a housing conveyancing solicitor's expertise. It is specialised expertise, and you would be looking at a lease document that's probably 60 or 70 pages long, and as often as what is not contained in that document as to what is in it that's important. And also, if you allow the proponent to draft up the lease document will be in soft language in his favour, not in your favour. So I think that's a very, very critical point, is to have an independent party negotiating all the finer points for you, and for goodness sake engage with your neighbours and try and get a collaborative approach together. So I think there's a unique time when energy prices and the urgent need for New South Wales government to solve a problem of its own making aligned to provide an opportunity to obtain significant revenue both for landholders of potential turbine and solar farm sites, together with the community at large through the actions of your council. Make use of the opportunity, and thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you, Max, very much. I think it's again very thought-provoking, and I can only hope that people who have signed agreements have been thinking of these things and are doing their due diligence properly and are getting proper legal advice and not back through the channel of the developer, and that people who are considering it take these points quite seriously. So we're going to now break into Q&A, and you might just give us a moment to get sorted out, but we're just going to take questions from the floor. There's been nothing prepared, but if you've got a question, I think we've got someone with a roving mic, and if we could have, I'm going to move this lectern, and if we could have perhaps all of the presenters on the stage, and we can share two of these mics. So we'll just take a moment to get set up.